She is 29. I am 64. We have been living in this apartment, in Brno, in the Czech Republic, for 18 months. A few minutes ago, I got off a video call with my son. He told me he was hiring a lawyer to investigate my finances. He thinks she's a scam artist who's after my retirement fund. My daughter thinks I'm having a midlife crisis, 20 years too late. They love me, and they think they're protecting me. What they don't understand is that this is the first time I've felt protected in years. They think my life is in danger. The truth is, my life was over. Now it's just beginning, and I'm going to tell you how it happened. To understand how I ended up in this apartment, arguing with my son through a screen, you need to understand the life I left behind. Before Brno, before Elena, there was Columbus, Ohio. For 40 years, my job was to make the world predictable. I was a logistics manager. My days were spent on a razor's edge of scheduling and efficiency, making sure a truck loaded with cargo arrived exactly when it was supposed to, not a minute sooner or later. My entire career was about eliminating variables, managing risk, and making sure the numbers on the spreadsheet matched the reality on the road. I was good at it. I believed in systems, in planning, and in the simple fact that if you did the right things in the right order, you'd get the right result. That's how I handled my finances, too. I wasn't wealthy, but I was secure. I was the kind of man who tracked his expenses his entire adult life. When I retired, my 401k had a balance of about $650,000. On top of that, Social Security and a small pension gave me a monthly income of $3,800. For 35 years, I lived with my wife, Susan, in a 4-bedroom house in a Columbus suburb. It was paid off. It was our home. After Susan died from cancer, 5 years before all this started, the house was just a building. A big, empty, quiet building filled with her things. The silence was a physical presence. Ours was a good marriage, a traditional one. Comfortable. And with her gone, my life became a series of loops. Handyman projects in the empty house. Predictable, weekly dinners with my 2 children, Mark and Jessica. They're good kids, and they love me, but after their mother died, they started to see me as a problem to be managed. Our conversations felt like status updates. They'd ask if I was eating right, if I needed help with the lawn, if I was taking my pills. They were checking boxes on a list titled Dealing with Dad. I felt like a fragile relic, an item on their agenda. I was lonelier in their presence than I was when I was by myself. My world had shrunk to the 4 walls of that house. I spent my evenings eating dinner alone, watching television I wasn't paying attention to. On paper, I had everything a man in my position was supposed to have. My finances were in perfect order. My house was maintained. I had a family that cared in their own way. But my life had no forward momentum. It was just a holding pattern. I was a ghost in a life I had meticulously built, waiting for an ending that had already been scheduled. The funny thing is, the change didn't start with a bang. It started with a cup of coffee. 2 years after Susan was gone, I finally took that trip we'd always talked about. Central Europe. I ended up in a city called Brno, in the Czech Republic. It was a nice place, old buildings, lots of students. I found a small, modern coffee shop near my hotel and went there every morning. And every morning, the same young woman was behind the counter. Her name was Elena. She was 27. Our conversations were nothing special, really, just small talk. But her English was perfect, sharp, a little bit sarcastic. She was smart, and she wasn't afraid to show it. It was just easy, pleasant. On my last day, I left a $100 bill in the tip jar. I also left a little note on a napkin. It said, "Thank you for the excellent coffee and conversation. It was the highlight of my time in your city." I didn't leave my name or my email. It felt like a clean, simple ending. A nice memory. A week later, back in Ohio, an email showed up. The subject line just said, Brno. It was from her. Turns out, a friend of hers worked at the hotel I'd stayed in, and she'd asked him to look up my contact information from the registration. For the next 6 months, we wrote to each other. We talked about books, about history, about the difference between a life in Ohio and a life in the Czech Republic. And I slowly realized something that scared me. I felt more alive, more seen, more myself in those emails with a stranger halfway around the world than I did in my own house, in my own life. So I did the math. A 1-month trip. I rented an Airbnb in Brno, just to see if any of it was real. For a month, Elena and I were just together. We walked. We talked. It was all very careful, very platonic. I remember one afternoon we were walking through the old town square and I had to stop to catch my breath. I felt a flash of embarrassment. The old man, huffing and puffing, but she just waited. She didn't make a big deal out of it. She started pointing out details in the architecture, telling me a story about one of the buildings. She made it feel like a shared pause, not a personal failure. In that moment, I felt cared for, not old. That night, over dinner, I finally brought it up. The elephant in the room. "Elena," I said, "I'm 64 years old." I just laid it out there. She looked at me, didn't even blink, and said, "I'm not interested in boys my age. They don't know what they want. You do." When I got back to the States, I knew I had to tell my kids. I sat them down at one of our weekly dinners and told them I was in a serious relationship with a 27-year-old woman from the Czech Republic. The reaction was immediate, and it was catastrophic. My son, Mark, pulled out his phone right there at the table and started searching for Czech romance scams. Jessica just started crying. She asked me if I was trying to replace their mother. I suggested they could talk to Elena over a video call. They refused. The wall went up that night, and it stayed up. Over the next year, I flew to Brno 2 more times. The relationship got more serious. Elena and I had the hard conversations. We talked about money, about what would happen if I got sick, about what we both wanted from life. I was completely transparent about my finances, and she was completely transparent that she had no desire to move to America. Her life, her friends, her future were in her country. So I did what I've done my entire life. I made a spreadsheet. I'm a logistics man. I believe in numbers. On one side, I put my monthly income, $3,800. Then I listed the expenses for a life in Ohio. Mortgage was paid, but the property taxes, the utilities on a big house, the insurance, the cost of living, it would be a struggle for 2 people. On the other side, I put the expenses for a life in Brno. I found out we could rent a modern 2-bedroom apartment for about $950 a month. All in, our monthly expenses would be around $2,200. Comfortable. Very comfortable. I looked at that spreadsheet for a long time. The numbers weren't emotional. They weren't judgmental. They were just facts. And the facts were clear. The life I wanted was possible. It just wasn't possible in Ohio. The numbers made the decision for me. I called a realtor the next day to put the house on the market. And then I sat my kids down one last time and told them I was moving. The moving truck pulled away from the house in Columbus, and that was that. 35 years of my life, condensed into boxes and sold. When the wire transfer for the house sale came through, $320,000, it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt like a number. A final, irreversible number. 3 weeks later, I stepped off a plane in Prague with 2 suitcases and a carry-on. That was it. My entire physical world reduced to what I could check on an airplane. Elena was waiting for me just past customs. She wasn't holding a sign. She wasn't running toward me. She just stood there with this small, calm smile, and when I reached her, she just took my hand. It was the quietest, most reassuring welcome of my life. We took a train to Brno and went straight to our new apartment. We'd found it online. It was in a modern building, a 10-minute tram ride from the city center. 2 bedrooms, big windows, and a small balcony overlooking a quiet courtyard. The rent was $950 a month. I did the math in my head about a dozen times on that first day. In Columbus, the property tax on my empty house alone was almost half that. Here, our total monthly budget, all in, came to around $2,200. That left a $1,600 surplus for my retirement income every single month. For the first time in years, the numbers on my spreadsheet felt like they were describing freedom, not just managing decline. The first few months felt like a blur of good things. Life became simpler and bigger all at once. I started taking Czech lessons twice a week at the university. I was terrible at it, the oldest person in the class by 40 years, but I learned enough to order coffee, buy groceries, and understand the punchline of a simple joke. It was humbling, and it was deeply satisfying. Elena and I would go for long walks. I could feel my body changing. The shortness of breath I'd felt on that first trip was gone. We were walking 5 miles a day without even thinking about it. About 6 months in, Elena wanted to have some of her friends over for dinner. They were all her age, university students, and young professionals. I'm not going to lie, I felt a knot in my stomach that whole day. The cliché was screaming in my head. The old man, trying to fit in. They arrived, and the first hour was awkward. They were polite, but distant. Then Elena brought out a board game, an American one I taught her. It was a game of strategy and negotiation. And suddenly, I wasn't the old boyfriend. I was just another player at the table. We laughed. We argued over the rules. And at the end of the night, one of her friends, a young guy named Thomas, shook my hand and said, in careful English, "You are not what I expected." I just nodded and said, "Me neither." It wasn't all a honeymoon. Real life showed up, as it always does. We had to navigate the residency permit process, which was a mountain of paperwork. But for a logistics guy, it was just another system to figure out. We had our first real argument, too. It was over something stupid. I wanted to buy a new, more expensive dishwasher. She said the one we had was fine. It wasn't about the money. I could afford it. I saw it as an upgrade, an optimization. She saw it as a waste. "My parents used the same dishwasher for 20 years, Frank," she said. "It's a machine. It works. We don't need a better one." I started to explain the efficiency ratings, the long-term value, and she just cut me off. "This isn't a truck fleet," she said, her voice sharp. "It's a home." The word stung, but she was right. I was trying to manage our life, not live in it. We talked it out that night. I admitted I was falling back into old patterns. She admitted she was sensitive to feeling like she was being financially managed. We didn't buy the dishwasher, and the relationship got stronger. It was real. It could handle a little friction. My life settled into a new kind of rhythm. It was a good rhythm. The Czech lessons, the long walks, the quiet evenings with Elena. It was a simple life, but it was ours, and it was full. The only part of my old life that still felt raw, that still felt like a problem without a solution, were the weekly video calls with my children. They were a fixed point in my schedule, every Sunday morning for me, Saturday night for them. And every week, they felt less like a connection and more like an interrogation. It started subtly. They'd ask about my health, but the tone wasn't caring. It was probing. When I told them I'd lost 15 pounds just from all the walking, Mark's first question was, "Are you eating enough? Is she cooking for you?" The implication was clear. I wasn't getting healthier. I was being neglected. When I mentioned I was co-authoring a paper with Elena for a historical journal, something that made me feel sharper and more engaged than I had in years, Jessica's response was a tight-lipped smile. "That's nice, Dad," she'd said. "Just be careful she's not taking advantage of your experience." The real shift happened around Christmas, about a year after I'd moved. I sent my grandchildren each a check for $500. It was more than I usually gave, but for the first time in years, I could afford it without a second thought. My budget wasn't just stable, it was comfortable. I felt generous. I felt like a good grandfather. 2 days later, Jessica called me, alone. "Dad," she started, and I could hear the rehearsed caution in her voice. "We appreciate the gift. We really do. But you don't have to be so extravagant. You need to be careful with your money now." I just stood there on my balcony, the phone feeling cold in my hand. It was a sunny, crisp winter day in Brno. I could hear the trams in the distance. And all I could think was, she isn't thanking me. She's warning me. She saw a gift not as an act of love, but as an act of foolishness. "Jessica," I said, trying to keep my voice even. I ran the numbers. "I can afford it. But can you afford it long term?" She shot back. "What happens in 5 years? In 10? What happens when she decides she wants a house? Or kids? Have you even thought about that?" Every question was a little jab, a little reminder that in their eyes, I was no longer a competent father. I was a liability. I was an old man being taken for a ride. I tried to explain my budget, the spreadsheet, the simple math that proved I was more financially secure now than I had been in Columbus. But it was like talking to a brick wall. They weren't listening to the facts. They were listening to their fears. That conversation stuck with me. For the first time, I felt the cold grip of the cliché they saw me as. The old fool. I spent that afternoon alone in my office, my financial spreadsheet open on the laptop. The numbers were all there, black and white, reassuring. My income, our expenses, a surplus. The nest egg from the house sale, sitting untouched in a low-risk investment fund. The math worked. The plan was sound. My entire career was built on making plans like this and executing them flawlessly. But looking at that screen, I could hear Jessica's voice in my head. What happens when she decides? I started questioning everything. Was I being naive? Was this all just a long con, and I was too close to see it? I looked around the apartment. The books she was reading were on the coffee table. The little plant she'd bought for my desk was in the corner. It was a life, a real, shared life. Was it all a performance? The thought was poison. It twisted the good things, the simple, happy moments, into something sinister. When Elena got home that evening, she knew something was wrong. I'm not good at hiding things. We sat on the couch, and I just laid it all out. The call with Jessica, the questions, the doubt. I told her I was afraid. Afraid that my kids were right. Afraid that I was just another headline in a story about a lonely old man. She listened without interrupting. When I was finished, she was quiet for a long time. I expected her to get defensive, to be angry. Instead, she just looked at me with this incredibly calm, steady gaze. "Frank," she said, her voice soft but firm. "When you were in logistics, if a driver called you and said he was afraid there was a monster on the road, but the satellite tracking, the traffic cameras, and the police all said the road was clear, what would you do?" I didn't know what to say. I'd tell him to trust the data. I finally mumbled. "Exactly," she said. "You were looking at the data, your spreadsheet, your bank account, your health, our life. It's all real. Your children are looking at the monster on the road, the story they invented. You can't reason with a person about a monster they want to see." She put her hand on my knee. "I am not the monster, Frank, and you are not a fool." Her logic cut through the fear. She was right. I was a logistics man. I trusted data, and all the data I had told me I was safe. I made a decision that night. I wasn't going to defend my life to my children anymore. I was just going to live it. The calls with Jessica became shorter, more strained. But the calls with Mark got worse. He's an insurance agent. His whole world is about managing risk, and he saw me as the biggest risk of all. He started to take a different tack. He became the concerned, professional son. "Dad, I've been looking into some things," he said one Sunday. "International asset management, estate planning. It gets very complicated with a foreign partner. There are tax implications." I knew what he was doing. He was trying to frame his intrusion as responsible planning. "Mark, my will is in order. My finances are simple," I told him. "But are they?" he pressed. "It would give me a lot of peace of mind if you'd let me just take a look. Maybe give me a read-only access to your accounts. That way I can keep an eye on things. Make sure no unusual withdrawals are happening. Just as a precaution." That was it. That was the line. He wasn't just questioning my judgment anymore. He was asking to take away my autonomy. He wanted to monitor me, like a child or a criminal. The anger I felt was cold and sharp. "No," I said. Just one word. "Dad, don't be like that. I'm just trying to protect you." "No, Mark. You're trying to control me," I said. "This conversation is over." And I hung up. For 2 weeks, there was silence. No calls. No emails. A small, cowardly part of me was relieved. But I knew it was the calm before the storm. And then, this morning, Mark called again. His voice was different. It was cold, formal, all the pretense of the loving son stripped away. "Dad, I've tried to be reasonable," he started. "You've left me no choice." He took a breath, and then he delivered the final blow. "I'm hiring a lawyer. We're going to petition the court for a conservatorship. We need to see your financial statements to prove you're competent to manage your own affairs." A conservatorship. The word hung in the air between us, an accusation so profound it took my breath away. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about my mind, my freedom, my right to be the author of my own life. They didn't just think I was a fool. They thought I was senile, incompetent, unfit to decide where I lived or who I loved. My own son, the boy I taught how to ride a bike, was telling me he was going to try and legally erase me. I hung up the phone. I didn't slam it down. I just pressed the red icon on the screen. The room was silent. I stood there, looking out the window at the quiet courtyard below. A woman was watering her flowers on a balcony across from ours. The sun was shining. A completely normal day. Conservatorship. The word is so clean, so clinical. A medical term for a financial execution. They think I've lost my mind. My son, my daughter, the two people I built my entire life around. They don't just disagree with me. They think I am incompetent. Not just a fool, but legally, medically, a person who can no longer be trusted with his own life. The man who taught them how to balance a checkbook, who co-signed their first car loans, who managed a 100-truck fleet on razor-thin margins for 40 years, that man was gone. In his place was a patient, a problem to be managed. I walked from the living room to the small office where I keep my desk. I sat down. I opened my laptop, and I looked at the spreadsheet again. The numbers stared back at me. Income, $3,800. Rent, $950. Utilities, 200. Groceries, 400. The surplus, sitting there in its little green cell. The nest egg, untouched. The data was all there. The road was clear, but I could hear the monster. It was my own son's voice. I don't know how long I sat there. An hour? 2. The sun moved across the sky. I heard the front door open and close. Elena was home from her job at the museum. I heard her put her keys in the little bowl we keep by the door. The rustle of her coat being hung up. She walked into the office, holding 2 grocery bags. She put them down on the floor and looked at me. She didn't have to ask. She could see it on my face. "The call with Mark," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. I couldn't find the words at first. My throat felt tight. "He's hiring a lawyer," I finally said, the words feeling like gravel in my mouth. "He's going to petition for a conservatorship, to take control of my finances, to prove I'm unfit." She didn't react. She just held my gaze. I waited for the anger, the fear that I told you so. I waited for her to get defensive, to see this as an attack on her. Instead, she just stood there for a long moment, watching me. Then she walked over, knelt down beside my chair, and put her hand on my shoulder. Her hand was warm, solid. "Frank," she said, her voice quiet and clear as a bell. "Their opinion doesn't pay our rent." And just like that, the monster was gone. The fear, the cold knot of doubt that had been sitting in my stomach for a year, it just dissolved. It was that simple. Their story, the one they were telling themselves in Ohio, was just that. A story. It had no power here. It couldn't change the numbers on my spreadsheet. It couldn't undo the life we had built. It couldn't reach into our apartment and take away the simple fact of her hand on my shoulder. They were fighting a ghost, and I was done fighting with them. I was home. So that's where we are. I'm sitting here, in my office, in our apartment in Brno. In a few days, I expect I'll get a letter from a lawyer my son hired in America, and I'm going to file it away. My blood pressure is the lowest it's been in a decade. I walk 5 miles a day without even noticing. Elena and I are co-authoring a paper on the cultural impact of post-war architecture in this region. It keeps my mind sharp. I am, for the first time in a very long time, deeply, uncomplicatedly happy. I miss my grandchildren. I do. But I don't miss being treated like a ghost in my own home. I don't miss being seen as a problem to be solved. And looking back at this whole thing, from that first cup of coffee to that phone call this morning, there are a few things I've learned. And if you're in a position anything like the one I was in, maybe they'll help you. First, you have to understand that your family will always see you through the lens of your past. To my children, I'm not Frank, the man who built a new life at 64. I'm Dad, the man who was married to their mother, who lived in the house they grew up in. That version of me is all they can see, and any deviation from that script feels like a betrayal. You have to be willing to disappoint them to be true to your present. Their love is real, but it can feel like a cage if you let it. Second, you have to confront the cliches head on. Don't let them fester in the dark. The age gap, the money. What happens if one of us gets sick? Elena and I talked about all of it right at the beginning. We put the ugliest, most awkward questions on the table and looked at them together. It was uncomfortable, but if honesty is enough to break your relationship, then it was already broken. You just hadn't admitted it yet. And third, and this is the most important thing I can tell you, love is the why, but math is the how. Don't ever make a move like this based on emotion alone. Hope is not a plan. Your financial freedom is the only real power you have when you're making a big change. I ran the numbers on our life here in Brno until they were boring. I knew exactly what was coming in and what was going out. That spreadsheet, that boring set of numbers, is the foundation of our life. It's what gives us our freedom. It's the data that proves the road is clear, no matter what monsters people tell you are on it. My son is right about one thing. I'm not the man he grew up with. That man died a little bit every day in that big, empty house. You don't have to move to the Czech Republic or fall in love with someone half your age. But if you feel like a ghost in your own life, you have my permission to do something about it. Ask the hard questions. Run the numbers. And then, be brave. If you want to see what this life actually looks like day to day, follow along. I'm just getting started.